so precious time is wasted instead of achieving the reduced cost to end users and patients so desperately needed. Bermuda is no different. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2000, only 2 years after an historic general election victory, the late C. Eugene Cox presented a budget statement to this honorable House, a mere 7 weeks into the new millennium. He forecast the change that would be ushered in with these words, and I quote, "The new economy is radically different. Services, information, skills, and to some extent, small enterprises will be its cornerstone. It will be difficult to touch, weigh, or measure with a yardstick most of its output, and its most valuable asset will be knowledge and creativity." Mr. Speaker, presenting this statement in support of the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the year 2020-2021 demands of this government that we continue the work required to perfect the accurate forecast of Mr. Cox. This economy is radically different, and we must nurture in our people the knowledge and creativity required from them to drive it and drive its success. Mr. Speaker, I will now focus on the domestic economy. In 2019, we have seen real signs that the Bermuda economy is improving. Many of the economic indicators, such as employment, cruise visitors, visitor spending, and construction activity, increased in 2019, indicating a strengthening of the Bermuda economy. Mr. Speaker, employment and unemployment are the driving forces behind economic growth and stagnation. Over the last years, employment numbers have been positive, and the pace of job growth has been steady, but moderate. I am pleased to report that the preliminary data from the 2019 employment survey indicates that the total number of jobs in Bermuda grew by 441, from 33,862 in 2018 to 34,303 in 2019, a 1.3% increase. This was the fourth consecutive increase and the strongest since 2006. Importantly, the number of jobs held by Bermudians increased, reversing the decline observed in 2018. Mr. Speaker, the report also shows that there was growth in the following sectors: hotels, public administration, construction, real estate, business services, education, health and social work, transport and communications, wholesale trade and motor vehicles, other community, social and personal, and most importantly, international business. There were offsets by declines in retail trade repair services, financial intermediation, restaurants, cafes, and bars, among others. In the first 3 quarters of 2019, employment income increased by $75.5 million to $2.72 billion, an increase of 2.9%. This level of compensation represents one of the highest on record. Based on figures released by the Department of Statistics, real gross domestic product, the primary indicator for economic growth, increased by an average of 3.5% in the first 2 quarters of 2019. However, while we are seeing economic growth, this increase is not broad-based, signaling that there is more to be done to ensure that economic prosperity reaches all segments of Bermuda's society. Imports increased by 8.2% over the first 3 quarters of the year to register at $864.3 million. This was driven by an increase in imports of machinery, due in large part to Belco's new power station construction project. Mr. Speaker, the estimated value of construction work put in place increased from $162.2 million in 2018 to $183.3 million over the first 3 quarters of 2019, an increase of 13%. The majority of the increase can be attributed to an increase in the levels of work performed on docks, bridges, the airport project, and tourism-related construction. Mr. Speaker, headline inflation continues to remain low in Bermuda, as reflected in the 2019 Consumer Price Index, which indicates an average inflation rate of 1%. This rate is below the UK, which observed a 2.6% rate of inflation, Canada 1.9%, and the United States 1.8%. Mr. Speaker, low inflation is beneficial for the economy as it encourages consumers to purchase goods and services and also supports productive planning and investment. Bermuda's balance of payment continues to record relatively high current account surpluses, which are an important strength in the Bermuda economy. Bermuda's total current account surplus over the first 3 quarters of 2019 was recorded at $635 million. This figure is 16.4% less than the $760 million recorded over the first 3 quarters of 2018. The decrease in the current account surplus was mainly due to changes in the primary income account, which saw a decrease of $81 million driven by a decline in investment income. Mr. Speaker, recently released tourism figures reveal a growing reliance on cruise visitors to shore up declining air arrivals. While the expanded cruise season adopted by the Bermuda Tourism Authority provides some economic benefit to specific sectors, decreased air capacity contributed to a more challenging landscape for Bermuda's tourism industry in 2019. Total visitor numbers of 770,683 were recorded in 2018. In 2019, that number grew by 4.9% to finish at 242,000. Air arrivals in 2019 decreased by 4.4%, while the number of cruise passengers increased by 10.6%. Total visitor spending in 2019 rose by $13.2 million, or 2.6%, settling at $518.5 million. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, the international business sector provided 3,995 jobs in the economy, reflecting a growth of 0.3% year over year, or an increase of 10 jobs. During 2019, 846 new international companies and partnerships were registered in Bermuda, representing a decrease of 164 registrations when compared with 2018. This decrease was mainly attributed to new economic substance requirements imposed by the European Union. Mr. Speaker, over the first 9 months of 2019, foreign exchange earnings of the international companies increased by $59 million to $1.53 billion, representing growth of 4%. As of the 31st of December 2019, Bermuda maintained its position as the premier jurisdiction for captives with a total of 715 captives, writing gross premiums of approximately $40 billion. There were 22 new captives registered in 2019, compared with 19 in 2018. The BMA has also registered a total of 69 new insurance entities in 2019, including 58 new insurers, reinsurers, and 11 intermediaries. The international insurance sector continues to show sound financial strength and a firm market position. Mr. Speaker, small and medium-sized businesses are an important part of the Bermuda economy, and they employ just over 6,300 persons, the majority of whom are Bermudian. Based on the statistics from the Office of the Tax Commissioner, remuneration paid and headcount of small businesses has grown in 2019. This growth can largely be attributed to the payroll tax concessions provided by the government in 2018 for new small business entrepreneurs. The Bermuda Economic Development Corporation has advised that between the 1st of April and the 31st of December in 2019, 18 new businesses have been approved, creating 27 new jobs. This is a good example of how tax policy can be used to create jobs. In the medium-sized business sector, job growth and compensation have remained relatively unchanged year over year. The government will again use tax policy to promote job creation in this sector of the economy by creating new payroll tax bands between the annual payroll tax thresholds of $200,000 and $500,000. As the new rates will be below the current 7% rate for this sector, it is anticipated that this relief should allow them to expand their employee base. Mr. Speaker, total retail sales for the first 11 months of 2019 decreased by 2.4% to register at $1.02 billion. Many of the difficulties being faced by local retail stores are not unique to Bermuda, as many brick and mortar stores have found it difficult to compete with mostly web-based businesses like Amazon. Are those who are providing an enhanced customer experience, often utilizing technology in their service delivery. Mr. Speaker, the government is very much aware of this pressure on certain segments of the retail sector, and over the years has provided the following relief: the elimination of the employer portion of payroll tax during the months of January, February, and March, customs duty relief measures on capital goods for the renovation and refurbishment of retail stores, and targeted payroll tax relief to retailers whose annual payrolls are greater than $1 million. The government will continue to find ways to assist this important sector of the economy. Mr. Speaker, another important measure that offers an understanding of the strength of consumer spending that is often overlooked is personal consumption. Personal consumption expenditure is a measure of national consumer spending. It tells you how much money residents spend on goods and services. It is an important measure of private consumption expenditure on services which are not covered in the more popular retail sales data that the government releases on a monthly basis. The most recent estimate by the Department of Statistics for household personal consumption are for the first 2 quarters of 2019. I can report that during that time period, total household consumption was $1.71 billion, reflecting an increase of 0.7% over 2018. Mr. Speaker, considering all economic indicators and the information presented, the Ministry of Finance estimates that Bermuda's GDP has increased by between 1% and 2% in 2019, following growth of 0.1% in 2018. Mr. Speaker, since our election in July of 2017, the Progressive Labour Party government has taken steps to fulfill our election promise to transform the Bermuda economy into one that is more fair and ready for the future. Last year, during the budget statement, I reviewed the government's economic plan. However, for the benefit of Bermuda, it is important that I reiterate that plan for folks. It had 5 planks. 1, build on what we currently do well in financial services and tourism. 2, diversify our economy so that we can attract companies in new industries to our shores. 3, reduce the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Bermuda. 4, make our government. And 5, reduce regulation and red tape to stimulate investment while promoting competition in the Bermuda economy. Over the last 32 months, we have made progress on all 5 measures. In building on what we do well in financial services, despite challenges from the U.S. tax reform and a wave of mergers and consolidations in our insurance sector, there were almost 100 more international businesses and business service jobs in Bermuda than there were 2 years ago. This can be attributed to continued growth in the long-term insurance sector and international law firms being permitted to operate in Bermuda. In tourism, we've seen additional investment in Bermuda's tourism product, with investments now confirmed for the redevelopment of the Fairmont Southampton Hotel and the upgrade and reopening of the St. George's Club. Mr. Speaker, there were 355 more tourism jobs in Bermuda as at the end of 2019 than there were in 2017. On the economic diversification front, the government is making sure that we attract new types of companies to Bermuda. Our investment into fintech has created 50 new jobs in the fintech industry locally, with many Bermudians being trained to assume roles as this industry continues to grow. Mr. Speaker, we've made progress in reducing the cost of living and the cost of doing business in Bermuda. Since 2017, we have reduced payroll taxes for working Bermudians to their lowest levels in 23 years, and there are more reductions to come. We have not increased payroll tax on employers, and we have given targeted reductions to struggling sectors such as retail. We've also seen energy costs go down for the first time in a generation, while the rate of inflation is running at a 56-year low. Mr. Speaker, efficiency within the operation of government has also been achieved. It is important that the public is aware of the facts surrounding the size of government. In December 2016, there were 4,470 persons on the government payroll. In December of 2019, there were 4,446, a decline of 24. Contrary to the narrative espoused by various components of the opposition, we have been successful in making the government more efficient while keeping a firm lid on our headcount in government. We have increased headcount where it matters in the areas of education, healthcare, and social services, while reducing it in others. Therefore, uninformed commentary that speaks to the expanding government needs to be taken for what it is, a falsehood that has no bearing in fact. The numbers speak for themselves.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, we've also made progress in reducing regulations and red tape to stimulate investment and promote competition in the Bermuda economy. We've eliminated payroll taxes for startup businesses, as well as having streamlined the processing for starting new local companies. In this budget session, we will introduce a bill that will reduce the required ownership of a local company from 60% Bermudian to 40% Bermudian, while maintaining the requirement for the board of directors to be at least 60% Bermudian. We have supported competition in the permission of international law firms to operate in Bermuda, and have been aggressive in courting additional financial services institutions to set up in Bermuda to provide competition to established players. Mr. Speaker, in 2016, the former Bermuda government entered into an agreement with the developers of the Caroline Bay project at Morgan's Point, and their lenders providing $165 million in guarantees with respect to project debt. In February of 2018, work partially stopped on the development and has since been fully suspended. Following receipt of letters containing notices of default from various project lenders in June of 2019 and August of 2019, the government entered into a loan agreement for $200 million with the Bank of NT Butterfield & Son Limited and HSBC Bank Bermuda Limited to facilitate the purchase of the interest of those lenders. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda government also purchased the claims from project contractors and supervised the payment of Bermudian subcontractors who had until that point remained unpaid for goods and services they had provided at Morgan's Point. To date, the government has borrowed $182.4 million to make good on its guarantee to purchase claims owed to contractors and subcontractors associated with the project and to fund other expenses related to professional services. Mr. Speaker, while discussions with the developer of Caroline Bay continue, it is the intention of this government to protect at all times the interests of the people of Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, tourism continues to lay claim as one of Bermuda's economic pillars, and for at least the last decade, the industry has been in recovery. Now there is cause for guarded optimism that we can grow this industry into one that delivers the value demanded by Bermuda's price point. Plans for the Fairmont Southampton Hotel should significantly upgrade Bermuda's hospitality product, joining new sites like the Lauren, St. Regis, and the Zura. In 2018, Bermuda saw 771,000 visitors to our shores, of which 68.2% were cruise ship arrivals. Like so many of our economic drivers, Mr. Speaker, we must act now to prevent Bermuda from becoming primarily a cruise destination to the exclusion of the longer staying air visitor. BTA data for 2018 versus 2019 indicate that cruise ship visitors are up 14%, while air arrivals are down 6%. This trend, uninterrupted, will minimize the economic impact Bermuda balance must be struck. Bermuda tourism works best for Bermudians and Bermudian businesses when air arrivals are up and hotels are full. Travelers of all income have increasingly more destinations at their disposal. Mr. Speaker, our tourism product is no longer unique enough to stand out from the noise of an increasingly crowded marketplace. We must up our game and improve it. Even the best marketing will struggle long-term to overcome these competitive headwinds. To continue charging these prices, we must evolve beyond a singular narrative of the island paradise. As part of the work to be done in this fiscal year, we must, one, restructure the BTA to focus more directly on its sales and marketing role. Two, devise and introduce a slate of annual events that drive visitors to Bermuda and better reflect our claim to be a luxury destination. And three, renew the efforts of air service development to expand airlift capacity from key markets. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's strength continues to be its sound legal system and strong jurisdictional reputation for appropriate regulation and a high standard of financial services provided. Using these strengths to our advantage means developing new areas for growth that require those ingredients to succeed. The first phase of the Ottawa A. Simmons Arbitration Center, the demolition of the old police headquarters, will begin next week, and from that site, Bermuda will firmly establish itself as a jurisdiction of choice for dispute resolution. In partnership with the private sector, a targeted Asia strategy is in hand and will be deployed to promote Bermuda as an alternative to those jurisdictions, one where there is political stability and business is welcomed. Mr. Speaker, the Incorporated Segregated Account Companies Act of 2019 received assent on 26th of November 2019 and introduces a new company structured product, the Incorporated Segregated Account Company, otherwise known as ISAC. Honorable members will recall that this legislation has been developed to create a new and innovative product to meet the needs of business stakeholders in Bermuda. The ISAC provides greater certainty via a statutory and common law basis for the segregation of assets and liabilities by creating separate corporate bodies. This new product has been embraced by industry and further diversifies Bermuda's corporate offering in a competitive global marketplace. Mr. Speaker, no sector has been more resistant to market forces than real estate in Bermuda. Prices remain relatively high when compared with what similar purchase prices can buy outside Bermuda, and sluggish sales have contributed to dented consumer confidence in the economy. There are 81 condominium units on the market today, and the average unit takes almost 2 years to be sold. Land is rare and must be protected for future generations. Strategies to open previously restricted markets must not harm the economic interest. This is a complex area, and it cannot be ignored that seemingly conservative lending practices by banks continue to frustrate potential first-time homeowners from entering the marketplace. Mr. Speaker, during this fiscal year, this government will advance measures to stimulate the real estate market. Hardworking young Bermudians and their families must be at the forefront of our policymaking in this area, along with those Bermudians who have invested in property and wish to see a legitimate return on that investment. Mr. Speaker, during this past fiscal year, the government has been forced to find money for things that did not form part of what we promised the people of Bermuda. When the glow of an election victory fades, the cold, harsh light of governance tests our ability to prioritize and often means choosing the unpopular and at the time misunderstood in the name of preserving the wider interest of the economy that serves the people. Millions of dollars had to be spent to meet tests imposed by the Financial Action Task Force, the EU, and the OECD in the areas of anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, and economic substance. Still more millions were required to meet the call on the previous administration's guarantee of the Caroline Bay development. We expect to see a return on both these expenditures, Mr. Speaker, but it is cold comfort to the people we represent when there are needs in the here and now that have been delayed as a result. The people should not have to wait any longer. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this budget will feature the largest capital spending plan in a decade and will see increased grants and contributions to invest in our communities. Mr. Speaker, this budget will, one, provide an additional $1 million in capital spending to support local improvements in the town of St. George and other local communities. Two, provide $2 million grant over 2 fiscal years for the community club development. Three, allocate $1.5 million over 2 fiscal years to support the development of a fishing cooperative via a shoreside facility at Southside. Four, deliver on the much needed renovation and move of the Marine and Ports headquarters and workshop. Five, deliver on our promise to take proper care of those young people who have aged out of the Dcfs regime, but need a base from which to live. And 6, deliver on our promise for mental health treatment for currently underserved populations. Mr. Speaker, in that 2000 budget statement, Mr. Cox said in words that apply as much today as they did then. We cannot afford to waste any Bermudian lives and opportunities if they, as individuals, and we collectively as a people, are to progress into the next century with confidence, fulfillment, and prosperity. Mr. Speaker, governments have an obligation, in fact, a duty to invest in their infrastructures in order to drive the momentum and growth of their economies. Fiscal constraints over the last decade have resulted in substantial reductions in some cases, the elimination of funding for certain critical infrastructure investments. In the 2020-2021 estimates of revenue and expenditure, we propose to increase the amount allocated to capital development spending to $60.1 million, an increase of $16 million, or 36.2%. These monies will be used to fund necessary investments in building repairs, relocation of courts, school and road repairs. Approximately $4.4 million of the increased spending will be funded from revenues raised from the new transportation infrastructure tax on cruise ships, which is intended to be used to fund improvements in Bermuda's tourism and transport infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to tackling the challenge of making government more efficient and more responsive to its citizens. The expressions of constructive criticism of how government works or does not work have not fallen on deaf ears. There is significant work to be done to streamline government processes and improve the interaction of government workers with the tax-paying general public. One only need look at the Department of Immigration to see how the use of technology and collaboration with private sector stakeholders have improved processing times for immigration services. In this vein, the government will be making additional funds available for significant investment in information technology with the goal of making government work better and be more responsive to the needs of our citizens. Mr. Speaker, the 2020-2021 budget development cycle saw the reintroduction of zero-based budgeting, which was intended to bring greater discipline to the allocation of limited financial resources that is in line with the government's overall policy initiatives and objectives. Assessments were performed of programs and decisions were made to fund those that were deemed high priorities, thus reducing or eliminating funding for those with limited efficacy or lower priority. Mr. Speaker, the government established an efficiency committee in March of 2018 with the mandate to review the functioning of all government departments and to make recommendations of improvements to operations. The efficiency committee concluded its work at the end of the last fiscal year and submitted its final report in April of 2019. The recommendations contained in the efficiency committee's final report were referred to the various government ministries and departments for further review and implementation. Additionally, some of the recommendations were incorporated into the deliverables under the Government Reform Initiative. Mr. Speaker, as a result of this committee's work, the backlog of unadjudicated stamp duty for property conveyancing in the Office of a Tax Commissioner continues to decrease and collections to steadily increase. Resources, processes, and procedures to strengthen the team at the Office of a Tax Commissioner to ensure payroll tax collection remains in sharp focus and have been addressed. Other efficiency committee recommendations that have been advanced include the completion of a review of the Information and Digital Technologies Department and the establishment of an IT governance policy with the view to moving the overall IT structure from a decentralized silo one to a centralized structure to ensure a more coordinated, efficient, and effective system for the acquisition and maintenance of IT equipment, software, and applications. This is not an exhaustive review. The initiatives mentioned herein are intended to demonstrate the effectiveness of the committee in stimulating active engagement, which has resulted in change initiatives across the service. Other initiatives commenced as a result of the committee's work are in channel and are likely to be highlighted by individual heads during the course of the budget debate. Mr. Speaker, during last year's budget statement, I stated it was incumbent upon government to create the conditions necessary to foster economic growth that result in increases in jobs, incomes, and the standard of living for Bermudians. In this vein, the government will take a number of measures intended to provide a stimulative effect on the Bermuda economy. Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget, there are no proposals for any new taxes. One more time. There are no proposals for any new taxes. Instead, the government will make a series of selective tax cuts aimed at reducing payroll taxes for those persons earning less than $96,000, bringing the rate paid in the $0 to $48,000 band of gross taxable compensation to its lowest level ever. The objective of this initiative is simple. It's to put money into the pockets of approximately 75% of the employees in Bermuda. The cost of this tax relief will be partially offset by modest increases in the employee portion of the payroll tax for those who earn more than $96,000. Additionally, after careful consideration and in an effort to assist small and medium-sized businesses, the government will introduce two new employer payroll tax bands between $200,000 and $500,000, which will have the effect of lowering the payroll tax burden for those businesses. The government will also expand the successful taxi industry payroll tax scheme to those persons who own and operate public service vehicles that include airport limousines, and minibuses. Lowering the cost of borrowing directly impacts the cost of housing. The cost of financing continues to be a major contributor to the cost of housing in Bermuda. In last year's budget statement, I announced that the government would work with a private sector bank to pilot a mortgage guarantee program that would lead to lower rates on mortgages. While progress on this initiative has been slow, in December of 2019, the government entered into a 15-month exclusive arrangement with one of the local banks to advance the development of a mortgage guarantee program. Over the coming months, the government will work in earnest with a local banking partner to deliver a mortgage guarantee program that will be designed to deliver lower financing costs to middle-class families seeking to secure mortgages of $750,000 or less. This program will be built around strong underwriting standards to protect the interests of the borrower, the lender, and the government. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda's unions have a proud history of advocacy in the development of innovative rights on the behalf of workers. Today, several of our unions have sought the support of the government in taking the next step in that journey with the creation of a union deposit company. As an idea, it is compelling. Bermuda's unions represent thousands of workers who are fully employed and collectively represent an existing market for Bermuda's lenders. Many union members are already mortgage holders who have demonstrated an ability to faithfully discharge their obligations. For any bank, a mortgage is a product, and who better to purchase that product from than your own financial institution? Enthusiasm, however, must be matched with responsibility for the public finances. Further, financial institutions must be properly managed with a level of discipline in order to be successful over the long term. This government has determined that in keeping with that best practice, prudent planning is the best next step in this journey. The government will provide assistance of up to $250,000 towards the development of a business plan to determine how a union deposit company might compete in a market with established players. As a financial institution, any future deposit company would come under the independent regulation of the Bermuda Monetary Authority and would have to convince depositors to provide it with funds to lend. However, we believe a union deposit company may play a vital role in offering an alternative to its members, and in doing so provide further competition and a reduction in mortgage lending rates. Mr. Speaker, this government is committed to performing regular assessments of the appropriateness and efficacy of Bermuda's regulatory and legislative regimes to ensure that they are appropriate for the jurisdiction and consistent with global best practice. There has been a growing movement in leading jurisdictions towards having the activities of the prudential regulator, supplemented by those of a financial conduct authority. A conduct authority is primarily tasked with protecting consumers and promoting healthy competition. The Bermuda Monetary Authority serves as Bermuda's prudential regulator and is responsible for, among other things, the promotion of financial stability and the effective supervision and regulation of Bermuda's financial services sector. Today, Bermuda does not have a financial conduct authority. Over the coming year, the government will work with key stakeholders to take the necessary steps to establish an appropriate financial conduct oversight entity that will focus on protecting the interests of consumers of financial products and services in Bermuda. It is the government's responsibility to ensure that the financial services sector works well and that it has products and services that are priced competitively and fairly benefit customers. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda investment environment provides competitive advantages for businesses striving to compete globally. Bermuda's own competitiveness in global markets is based on a unique set of strategic advantages, which include, but it's not limited to, the following. 1, proximity to U.S. capital markets. 2, UK and US compatible law and regulation. And 3, extensive regulatory cooperation as well as recognized regulatory quality. Investment keeps our economy open, dynamic, and competitive, and helps to ensure that Bermuda continues to be the best place in the world to do business. However, as a small and open economy with limited economic diversification, the Bermudian economy is vulnerable to external factors. These include changes in international tax policy and regulatory standards that could adversely affect our business sector and impact our way of life. In a similar vein to priority actions taken in many other sectors, the government is working with a number of stakeholders to introduce a new private family office product to further meet the needs of ultra-high net worth individuals who require a different wealth management model to meet their estate planning objectives. It is because of Bermuda's strength as an international financial center that many institutions have worked closely with the government to develop solutions tailored to the specific requirements of the financial services sector. The development of a family office product is an expansion of wealth management sectors in Bermuda, thus demonstrating Bermuda's commitment to these sectors and to the government's diversification mandate. With a broadening of the Bermuda's wealth management product set, there is an expectation that opportunities for Bermudians in this sector will grow. Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of the session of this Honorable House, the government pledged to focus on reducing the cost of living for Bermudians. Over the last 15 months, we have made some progress, but there is more that needs to be done. The main contributors to our high cost of living are energy, healthcare, housing, and food prices. The government is committing to reducing energy costs and has supported a number of initiatives. Last year, we funded an LED bulb exchange program, which saw thousands of Bermudians participate to reduce their energy bills. Recently, Bermudians saw a reduction in core energy prices rates due to a tough line the government has taken with Bermuda's energy suppliers. Additionally, the government has made it clear to the proposed new owner of Belco that increased costs to the people of Bermuda will not secure our approval. Finally, to support the transition to renewables outlined in last year's throne speech, the government, in partnership with international companies, will set up a green energy fund to provide capital to deploy solar installations throughout the island. The objective is simple: to provide jobs for solar installers and relief from high energy bills. Bermuda can lead the world in renewable energy adoption, and this government will work to make that a reality. Mr. Speaker, the goal of the Bermuda Health Plan is to reduce the amount of money that Bermudians spend on health care. Health insurance and out-of-pocket costs provide a real challenge to most Bermudians, and that is why the government is focused on bringing needed reforms that make our system more efficient while reducing co-pays and providing better coverage for preventative care. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to housing, the government has taken and will take further steps to reduce the cost of housing and mortgages. First, we boosted competition in the mortgage market by eliminating taxes when you transfer your mortgage to a bank that may have had a lower interest rate. This year, the government will, in partnership with a local financial institution, pilot a mortgage guarantee program aimed at reducing mortgage rates for some Bermudian families. Last year, we changed laws that will allow international companies to invest in approved residential schemes in our economic empowerment zones. Investment in city residential developments will result in construction jobs and an increase in the available housing stock. The objective of this initiative will be to increase the supply of quality, affordable residential. Mr. Speaker, the government acknowledges the impact that food prices have on the cost of living. In an effort to promote more price transparency and aid consumers in identifying alternative food pricing, the government will be amending the Cost of Living Commission Act to require reporting of prices from grocers to the government. This information will be made available to the public via mobile application so that consumers can compare the differences in prices of staple goods. Finally, the government is working to support startup and cooperative companies who are looking to supply food at lower prices by partnering with the Financial Assistance Program to reduce costs not only to taxpayers, but also to the general public. This is an innovative way in which money that is already being spent by the government can be redirected to support competition in Bermuda and reduce food prices. Mr. Speaker, before commenting further in detail on the estimates for the fiscal 2020-2021, it is important that I provide an update on the government's financial performance and the forecast for the current financial period. The forecast of the current year's financial performance is the base from which the budget for fiscal 2020-2021 is formulated. Mr. Speaker, the government is forecast to earn $1.111 billion in revenue in 2019-2020. This is the 7.5 million or 0.7% less than the 1.118 billion in the original estimate, and is due mainly to lower than expected stamp duty, hotel occupancy tax, and fees for the sale of land to non-Bermudians. These amounts were partially offset by a higher collection in payroll tax. The projected 2019-2020 operating expenses for the government are 940.2 million, or 10.3 or 1.1% higher than the 929.9 million originally budgeted. This was primarily due to a strategic decision to provide financial support of $3 million to secure winter air service from New York and Boston, and subsidy funding of $7.8 million for the Bermuda Hospitals Board as part of the block grant provided to the hospital in relation to the reform of healthcare. Mr. Speaker, included in total operating expenses is a 2.5% salary increase awarded to some public officers. As this amount was unbudgeted, departments have had to find savings from within their existing budget allocations. Revised capital expenditures for the year are predicted to come in at 66.1 million, or 1.3 million above the budget of 64.7 million. This increase was due to a delay in the receipt of new buses and additional grant funding provided to the National Sports Center to resurface the track in anticipation of the Carifta Games being held in Bermuda in April 2020. Debt service costs for 2019-2020 are forecast to be 2.7 million above the estimated 116.5 million. This is due to interest and facility fee costs in relation to the borrowing incurred to make good on the Caroline Bay guarantees by purchasing the interests of the Tranche B and Tranche C lenders for the project. Given the factors outlined above, the revised estimate of the overall deficit is 14.6 million, 22 million more than the 7.4 million surplus that I projected last year. Mr. Speaker, while I'm disappointed at this outcome, the reality is that budgets are dynamic funding plans that are subject to unanticipated events. There's a reason these are termed estimates. Considering the increased complexity of government, on occasions we have to facilitate additional funding for under-budgeted and or unanticipated additional expenditures that may arise during the year, such as the Caroline Bay situation. During this fiscal year, $180 million of private placement notes matured and were paid off from the sinking fund, which reduced interest expense on an annual basis by 12.1 million. Conversely, the government had to draw 182.4 million to meet its obligation for the Caroline Bay project and may have to borrow another 14.6 million to fund the projected deficit for fiscal 2019-20. With regard to the Caroline Bay project, while the government has a legitimate expectation to recover these costs, they had to be funded by either new borrowing or using funds from the consolidated fund. Mr. Speaker, for the remainder of this fiscal year, the government will continue to look for savings to offset the above-mentioned overages, and the Ministry of Finance will exercise prudent management of funds to ensure that we do not incur any additional borrowing. Therefore, on 31 March 2020, net debt will stand at $2.658 billion. The sinking fund is projected to be approximately $38.9 million in balance at the end of 2019-2020. Sorry. Mr. Speaker, the 2020-21 national budget allocates $1.141 billion in total spending over the next 12, a $30.9 million or 2.8% increase over the 2019-20 original estimates. Revenues are forecast to rise by a modest 0.3% or $3.7 million, and the current account balance before interest on debt and capital expenditure is budgeted to be a surplus of $186.6 million. The current account balance after interest is also projected to come in at a surplus in the amount of $65.2 million. This represents a slight decrease in the current account surplus of $6.9 million when compared with the 2019-20 budget. Given the above, Mr. Speaker, the government plans to run a deficit of $19.8 million. The projected current account balance, excluding debt service, indicates whether revenue can support the day-to-day running of government, excluding interest on debt and capital expenditures. This year's budget, with the current account surplus of $186.6 million, has sufficient revenue to cover not only the day-to-day running of government, but also the interest on debt. Mr. Speaker, the government anticipates long-term borrowing in this fiscal year of $19.8 million. This borrowing will be used to fund a portion of the capital expenditures and is in line with one of our fiscal rules that net borrowing can only be considered to finance capital spending. Mr. Speaker, as of 31st of March 2021, it is estimated that gross public debt will stand at $2.717 billion, and debt net of the sinking fund will be $2.678 billion, $72.4 million below the sinking debt ceiling. Mr. Speaker, the revenue estimate for 2020-2021 is $1.122 billion, a modest 3.7 or 0.3% higher than the original estimate for the previous year. The most significant increase will be in relation to taxes on cruise ship passengers and uplifts to immigration fees. Other than these adjustments, there are no new or increased taxes contained in the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. We will be providing payroll tax relief to workers and to small and medium-sized businesses. We will also extend payroll tax relief to employers with payrolls of $500,000 and above for the creation of new jobs in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, the total fiscal impact of the payroll tax relief to workers and small and medium-sized businesses will be a reduction in the government's payroll tax yield of approximately $6.4 million. Honorable members are aware the government released the pre-budget report in advance of this budget. The pre-budget report provides an opportunity for stakeholders such as businesses and social groups to understand and comment on options for the next budget. This can give stakeholders confidence that the government's budget policies are grounded in longer-term fiscal and budget strategies. In addition, the report contains some policy options that were under consideration by the government. I would like to thank all stakeholders who provided submissions during the consultative pre-budget process. It is an example of the approach this government will take to ensure that we conduct our business in an open and transparent manner. Following consultation, the ministry will take the following actions to meet the government's revenue target in 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, payroll taxes remain a highly effective and reliable way to raise revenue. The yield from payroll tax is estimated at $467 million in 2020-21, 41.7. As mentioned earlier, the pre-budget report indicated that the government would consider reducing or eliminating the lowest band of payroll tax to provide relief to the workers in that band. It was noted that if the government reduced or eliminated the lowest band, it would seek to make the yield for the employee portion of payroll tax neutral by raising the rates in the remaining three bands. Following the pre-budget consultation, the government proposes to amend rates as follows. Remuneration of 0 to 48,000, the rate will be adjusted from 4% to 2%. Remuneration for $48,001 to $96,000, the rate would be adjusted from 6.5% to 8.5%. Remuneration of $96,001 to $235,000, the rate would be adjusted from 7.75% to 9%. And remuneration greater than $235,000, the rate will be adjusted from 8.75% to 9.5%. Mr. Speaker, following this reform, anyone making less than $96,000 will see a reduction in taxes, and anyone making more than $96,000 will see a slight increase in their taxes. Additionally, the government projected payroll tax yield is estimated to be reduced by approximately $3.8 million as a result of this reform. An illustration of the combined tax savings under the new rates for selected salaries for fiscal year 2018-2019, when we last reduced the lowest band, and this year is set below. Tax savings in more detail for this fiscal year are in Table 10 in the appendix. Mr. Speaker, following the pre-budget consultation, the government will extend payroll tax relief for the creation of new jobs in Bermuda to employers with payrolls of $500,000 and above. This program will provide a 2-year employer payroll tax concession for additional jobs created in Bermuda. Following the pre-budget consultation, the government will create 2 new payroll bands between the annual payroll thresholds of $200,000 and $500,000. This tax relief to small and medium-sized businesses should allow them to expand their employee base. The proposed bands are as follows. Between $200,000 and $350,000 at a tax rate of 3.5%, 50% reduction, and between $350,000 and $500,000 at a tax rate of 6.5%. Mr. Speaker, the government will expand the successful taxi industry payroll tax scheme to all persons with public service vehicles. This includes limousines, airport limousines, and minibuses. Further consultation will occur with owners of these vehicles in this sector before any decisions are finalized. The pre-budget report signaled that the government would assess the cost of increasing the deductible on dividends paid to shareholders from the $10,000 limit. Following this initial assessment, the government will not be increasing the deductible. Rather, we will further evaluate this proposal during the ensuing year in order to gain a clearer understanding of the effect that it will have on the payroll tax yield. Mr. Speaker, the yield from customs duties is estimated at $235 million, or 21% of total government revenues. There will only be minor changes in the customs tariff, such as raising the rates on cigarettes containing tobacco substitutes in line with the rate of cigarettes and zero rating certain items. However, Mr. Speaker, to assist retailers, the Ministry of Finance will expand the scope of goods that receive relief under the Retail Shops Temporary Customs Duty Act of 2008, which provides a zero rate of customs duty on imported capital goods intended for the renovation and refurbishment of retail stores. Also, the Customs Department will ease the financial burden on retailers by making the customs duty deferral process more user-friendly. This will assist retailers with their cash flow, as customs duty will not be paid upfront, but rather after they have sold at least a portion of their goods. Appropriate checks and balances will be put in place to mitigate the risk of non-payment of deferred duty. Mr. Speaker, poor health choices in Bermuda, among other things, contribute to our collective high healthcare costs. One of the measures put in place by the government to encourage healthier choices was the sugar tax. In October 2019, following 6 months of the full implementation of the sugar tax, the Cabinet authorized a review of the policy to ensure that it was having its intended effect. Consumption of items affected by the sugar tax in Bermuda has decreased. People, where they can, are making healthier choices as the cost of items with sugar have increased. However, Mr. Speaker, the broad application of the sugar tax through the customs tariff has led to some items containing relatively small amounts of sugar being taxed. For example, items like sugar-free Coffee Mate have been caught up by the tax when they were not the intended target. During this session, we will introduce amendments to the sugar tax to allow greater discretion for customs officers to waive sugar tax duties for items containing relatively small amounts of sugar. During this fiscal year, up to the 31st of December 2019, the sugar tax has raised an additional $4.7 million in revenue. Although monies were earmarked for programs to assist with healthy choices, the needs and demands for additional funding in the areas of mental health, public education, and additional support services for young Bermudians who have aged out of Dcfs are considered higher priorities for the government. Notwithstanding the foregoing, additional funding from sugar tax receipts have been allocated to the Ministry of Health to work with local restaurants on an initiative to add nutritional information to menus. Mr. Speaker, every 2 years since 1996, the government reviews all fees charged for government services, such as vehicle licenses and various permits. The last biannual review of government fees was conducted in 2008, when fees were increased generally by 5%. Although this is the year in which these increases were due, this government will not add to the cost of government services for the people of Bermuda. So for the first time in 24 years, I'm happy to let the people of Bermuda know that the government will not be asking you to pay more to license your car. Mr. Speaker, following last year's notification to all cruise lines, the Ministry of Tourism and Transport proposes to redefine the large ship infrastructure tax as a transport infrastructure tax. Additionally, the tax rate will be increased from $22 to $25 per person over the age of 2. The new rate will take effect from the 1st of May 2020 for all cruise ships that berth in dockyard between the 1st of April and the 31st of October, regardless of the size or passenger count. The increase in revenue yield from this change is estimated at $4.4 million. The majority of the revenue received from the infrastructure tax will be used to invest in tourism and transport infrastructure. Following the pre-budget consultation, and mindful of the impact of any further increases in company fees on Bermuda's competitiveness, the government will not be amending any company fees. Mr. Speaker, the Registrar of Companies is actively going through a transitional period. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, to keep in step with the modernization of the department, the Registrar has undertaken to perform a complete and holistic review of the department's corporate fee structure. Mindful of the comparative considerations of our competitive jurisdictions and Bermuda's intention to continue attracting premium entities, and balance with the understanding that effective regulation of any jurisdiction brings inevitable cost, the approach will be measured in contemplation of all of the factors that impact industry and Bermuda's economic framework. The Registrar, working with external consultants, is committed to robust industry consultation and engagement as he navigates through this process with a view to making recommendations to the Ministry by July of 2020 as to what possible next steps may be appropriate. Mr. Speaker, after considering the Tax Reforms Commission's recommendation to increase the yield from immigration fees, the government will increase all immigration fees by 5% to ensure there is reasonable cost recovery for the provision of various services offered by the Department of Immigration. The pre-budget report signaled that the government was considering levying a tax on professional services provided by non-Bermudian businesses to local and international companies. Following consultation, the government will not introduce this tax. In their recent report, the Fiscal Responsibility Panel noted the following, and I quote, "The budget 2019-2020 does, as recommended in several of our previous reports and by the TRC, incorporate a much more determined effort to improve the efficiency and timeliness of tax collection by increasing the resources of the Office of a Tax Commissioner, modernizing payment methods, and improving enforcement. We are impressed by the pace of the modernization effort in the Tax Commissioner's office. The government should continue to attach a high priority to ensuring that this work has the necessary political and financial support," end quote. Mr. Speaker, despite this endorsement, the the government recognizes there is much more work to be done in this area. As per recommendations from the Caribbean Technical Assistance Center, CARTEC, and the Efficiency Committee, the Office of the Tax Commissioner has decided to modernize its tax administration into an organization that operates according to modern standards and that is enabled by powerful information technology support. Mr. Speaker, the government will use all available means to collect overdue taxes, thereby improving the government's cash flow. To this end, the government is currently considering ways to supplement and enhance the debt collection function within government and is working through the procurement process to engage relevant service providers that can assist with this matter. Other options that will be evaluated include a tax amnesty program. The proposed amnesty would provide eligible taxpayers with 9 months from the determined commencement date to settle 75 to 85% of the total amount due by more than 90 days. The remaining 25% to 15% will be forgiven. Finally, the government will assess the feasibility of factoring our accounts receivable. Mr. Speaker, factoring is a financial transaction and a type of debtor finance in which a business or government sells its accounts receivable to a third party called a factor at a discount. A business will factor its receivables to meet its present and immediate cash needs. Mr. Speaker, too much manually filed tax returns. A new policy was implemented on the 1st of April of 2019 for taxpayers of gross annual payrolls in excess of $500,000 per year. It was made mandatory for taxpayers over that threshold to file electronically using the e-tax system with the June 2019. It is now proposed that this policy be expanded to require all taxpayers with payrolls greater than $250,000 per annum to file electronically. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure, including debt service, of $121.4 million and capital investment of $85 million is estimated at $1.142 billion, $30.9 million, or 2.7% higher than grow and diversify Bermuda's economy and revitalize our infrastructure in a fiscally prudent and responsible manner. Operating expenditure in 2020-21 is forecast to be $935.6 million. This amount represents an increase of $5.7 million, or 0.6% over the 2019-20 original estimate of $929.9 million. Holding nominal program spending growth to this level this fiscal year means that in real terms, the government is reducing spending across the board. Mr. Speaker, the increase in operating expenditure is directly related to the provision of improved and expanded services and programs. The major drivers for this adjusted operating expenditure by the ministries are as follows. The Cabinet Department, to fund an implementation team in central government to support the implementation of various government proposals. Ministry of Legal Affairs, funding for operational programs for young people too old for children's facilities and increased grant funding. Ministry of Finance, funding for additional posts in the Registrar of Companies for economic substance regulatory framework and increased grant funding for the Bermuda Public Accountability Board. Ministry of Health, funding for community mental health programs and increased grant funding. And finally, Ministry of Education, funding for enhanced student behavior management services, educational therapists, and counseling services. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to aggressively managing our expenditure, and in order to determine high priority policy programs, the Budget Office reintroduced zero-based budgeting for the upcoming fiscal year. Policy prioritization at the start of the budget process facilitate a better alignment of the allocation of limited resources with the government's overall policy initiatives and objectives. ZBB is a method of budgeting in which all expenditures must be justified starting from zero. ZBB involves a fundamental re-examination of all departments, business units, or services, and justification of funding and performance. This method requires that each department analyze its entire budget request in detail both current and proposed new services, in order to identify the most effective and efficient method for service delivery and resource allocation. This analysis includes examination of the service's purpose or objectives, alternative service delivery models, proposed service levels and the resource requirements, consequences or risk of not providing the service, and the benefit and outcome of each service level. Once the analysis has been completed, all service levels for each department are ranked, and a consolidation and final ranking of all the departments within a ministry is composed. Mr. Speaker, the respective ministers have reviewed the final ministerial rankings and agreed the priorities and spending proposals, after which all submissions have been presented to the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, debt service costs for 2020-21 are projected at $121.4 million. Approximately 7.9 of this expenditure is related to the Caroline Bay project. It is well recognized that interest rates are relatively low, and the ministry would therefore use the opportunity not only to finance the 2020-21 deficit, but also to refinance the loan agreement arranged to facilitate the Caroline Bay obligations and to refinance existing more expensive government debt at a more favorable rate, therefore reducing debt service pressure on the budget. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to capital investment. The government remains committed to making sound capital investments that will revitalize the country's infrastructure, support growth, create jobs, and improve our quality of life. The capital expenditure component of the 2020-21 budget is set at $85 million, $20.3 million higher than the 2019-20 original estimate. The most significant item of capital development expenditure in the 2020-2021 budget relates to upgrading the Parliament building and relocating the courts. That's $3.2 million. Major building upgrades, $3.1 million. School maintenance, $3 million. And roadworks, $2.8 million. While most of the planned investment is related to construction projects, there is a capital acquisition provision of $24.9 million, which includes IT developments across government, about $9 million, and new public buses, $4.4 million, ferries, $2 million, and other vehicles to support public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, I will now review highlights from the 10 ministries that form the government. Ministry of Education. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education will receive a budget allocation of $137.6 million, which is $512,000 higher than last fiscal year. The Ministry of Education has allocated an estimated total of $2.1 million in fiscal 2020-21 for funding additional initiatives that support the execution of Plan 2022 strategies and to continue the administration of the merit-based College Promise Program for public school graduates to attend the Bermuda College. Focus will be placed on the restructuring and redesign of the Bermuda public school system and the provision of key wraparound services needed for students who exhibit severe behavior in public schools. Mr. Speaker, changing severe student behaviors requires consistent daily intervention and support. Accordingly, 2 support centers will be introduced in the public school system for the primary school level and the middle senior school level at a cost of approximately $520,000. Full-time professionals that include education therapists and school counselors will be hired. One, the commencement of redesign and restructuring the Bermuda public school system in alignment with adaptive strategies outlined in Plan 2022. In addition to the government's platform initiative to phase out middle schools, Plan 2022 outlines the longer-term transformational strategy of establishing specialized schools that focus on the projected needs of the community. Plan 2022 also states the need for renovating and/or consolidating school facilities. This requires the redesign and reconfiguration of schools. Mr. Speaker, the Bermuda College will continue to receive a grant to give our public school senior students greater access to the college. As a result, the ministry has allocated $250,000 for the College Promise Program that was introduced to the college during the previous budget year. Ministry of Public Works. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Public Works provides highly visible services and infrastructure to the island. This infrastructure must be well maintained to ensure safety of users and longevity to achieve operational efficiencies. The ministry provides the stated services and infrastructure through its 6 departments and has budgeted to spend $41.2 million in capital development, inclusive of grant funding to Quangos, $3.4 million in capital acquisition, and $73.3 million in operations in 2020-21. The Ministry's current expenditure allocation is the same as the last fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, charged with the responsibility of efficient management of the government's property portfolio, the Department of Public Lands and Buildings has an operational budget of $19.9 million in 2020-21 and will be working on the refurbishment of the Parliament building, as well as other buildings, school maintenance, major building upgrades, and various office relocations and alterations. The Department of Land Valuations maintains an accurate and up-to-date valuation list of all properties in Bermuda for land tax purposes, including the quincennial revaluation of those properties in accordance with the Land Valuation and Tax Act of 1967. In this fiscal year, the department will conduct its quincennial reevaluation of land, after which the 2020 draft valuation list will be produced. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Labor, Community Affairs and Sport will receive a budget allocation of $18.7 million, the same as the 2019-2020 allocation. The ministry has a number of key initiatives, including modernization of labor laws, the implementation of a living wage and pay equity for Bermudians that will be delivered during the next fiscal year. Departments within the ministry will also be increasing opportunities for Bermudians through sports, workforce development, and community and cultural affairs. The Department of Workforce Development will be increasing opportunities for Bermudians with an increase in budget for scholarships of $100,000 to $450,000 and an increase in budget for apprenticeships by $25,000 to $420,000. This reflects the commitment of the ministry and department to the development of our workforce and assisting Bermudians to become job ready. Speaker, the Ministry of Health's budget for next year will be $243.3, which is an increase of $1.9 million to promote and protect Bermuda's health. The ministry is comprised of 5 budget heads that fund 7 departments, 2 Quangos, and 29 boards, councils, and committees. Together, these entities work to improve the quality, access, and sustainability of health services. The Ministry of Health's budget is among the few that has received additional funding for the upcoming fiscal year, 2020-21. This increase reflects the government's recognition and commitment to the fragility of some of our health services and funded programs and the significant value health plays in Bermuda's economic growth. This increase will assist in providing new community mental health services and increase funding to senior care facilities. Mr. Speaker, the ministry continues to address the need of adults with intellectual disabilities and mental health problems, some of whom have no next of kin and therefore need the care of the state. Currently, the ministry has to care for 2 individuals in overseas institutions as there is no local capacity to meet their disability or mental health, costing $256,000 per year and the other approximately $350,000 in the upcoming year. These are just examples of the extraordinary circumstances dealt with by this ministry, which is charged with a significant mandate over a sector that consumes 11% of the country's GDP and represents the largest government budget. This is money well spent, however, because the health budget is not just expenditure, it is an investment in the economic prosperity of the country, which requires a healthy, productive, and economically active population. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance, excluding debt service, is provided with a budget of $105.1 million, an increase of $750,000 or 0.7%. The majority of the Ministry of Finance's allocation, $84.7 million or 81%, relates to non-discretionary expenditure, which includes an estimate of government's overhead and payments made under the program for war veterans. The bulk of the increase in the ministry's budget has been allocated to the Register of Companies. These funds will primarily be used for additional resources required to monitor and enforce Bermuda's economic substance regime in line with the OECD standards. Additionally, the ROC has embarked upon implementation of a new IT registry system. Phase 1 of the system, which deals with economic substance, will be rolled out before June 2020, with the other phases being finalized later in 2020. Mr. Speaker, Bermuda continues to face a number of external tax and regulatory threats. These threats pose a real and present danger to our economy. During the upcoming year, the ministry has had to reprioritize funds in order to provide additional grant funding for the Bermuda Public Accountability Board. The primary function of the board is to oversee the supervision and enforcement of auditors who carry out business in Europe in accordance with the Bermuda Public Accountability Board of 2011. The board's primary goal is to achieve equivalency with the audit requirements set down in Article 45 of the EU Audit Directive. This board has been operating with effect from the 11th of July 2012 with minimal funding. The government has determined that a fully operational secretariat or office should be set up to add substance to the process. This is also seen as a positive step in gaining the equivalent stature from the EU. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance is responsible for the collection of the majority of government revenue, and in 2018-19 collected $948.5 million, or 86% of government revenue. Accordingly, it is critical that the capacity of the revenue collecting departments to effectively collect revenue is maintained. The budget of the OTC has been increased as it seeks to embark on a tax administration modernization program. Additional funding has been provided to the Department of Social Insurance to fund a much-deserved pension increase for our war veterans. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Finance will keep the Progressive Labour Party platform promise by increasing pensions for our seniors by the rate of inflation this year and every year as long as we are in office. The Cabinet Office departments will receive a budget allocation of $48.2 million, which is $2.2 million or 2% higher than in 2019-20. Mr. Speaker, of this amount, $1.5 million represents the centralization of permanent secretary salaries from other ministries to the Cabinet Office. Also, key initiatives to diversify the economy and promote economic growth in Bermuda demand the attention of specialists and leaders in their respective fields. This can only be achieved for Bermuda if we commit to the engagement of specific resources tasked with breaking through the regulatory and technical gridlock that often serves to restrict new economic growth. Therefore, the additional funding for the Cabinet Office is provided for the assembly of an implementation team which will drive the delivery of important initiatives identified by Bermuda First. Mr. Speaker, the government's agenda is ambitious, and for the pace of reform to increase, there must be dedicated resources to advance initiatives without the distraction of the routine matters associated with public service administration. The Cabinet Office will continue its drive for government-wide reform during the budget year. Some of the long-term goals of this reform are digitalization of government forms, online payments for government services, and a paperless office environment. The reform also includes a program of developing the potential and leadership within the civil service. Mr. Speaker, the Post Office will continue its phased installation of systems that will enable it to provide enhanced services and products to the public, such as accepting payments for various government services at its different locations. The Post Office is also looking to enhance its courier service capabilities with a view to providing a reliable, competitive, and cost-effective parcel delivery service. The Post Office is in the second of three phases of this implementation, with the results being vastly improved services and offerings. As recently announced by the Honorable Premier, a new department to be called the Economic Development Department will be established during this new budget year. The Cabinet has already approved the creation of this department, and this fiscal year will see its structure put into place with the redeployment of staff in the Business Development Unit, the FinTech Unit, and the Department of Information Digital Technology will be allocated capital funding for several systems upgrades. These include telephone systems upgrades, portal upgrades, and digital spent on systems upgrades to accommodate a capital grant of $1 million towards the establishment of the Uptown Development Authority. The mission of this BEDC subsidiary will be to implement the new Northeast Hamilton Development Plan and drive residential development projects in Northeast Hamilton. Speaker, the budget for the Ministry of Tourism and Transport will remain at $88.3 million in the upcoming fiscal year. In addition to funding the Departments of Transport Control, Public Transportation, and Marine and Port Services, the ministry provides grants to the BTA and the Bermuda Airport Authority. Mr. Speaker, the National Tourism Plan, which was released in 2018, set out a multi-year roadmap for our aspirational future for tourism by providing a collaborative way forward from infrastructure improvements to greater year-round visitor balance and greener, more sustainable approaches. The BTA will work with its partners and stakeholders to achieve the aim of the National Tourism Plan. The 2020-21 budget for the BTA of $22.5 million has been maintained at the same level as 2019-2020. However, as noted earlier, the pending restructure of the BTA may cause some of this grant to be redirected as a result of the restructuring. As mentioned previously, the Ministry of Tourism and Transport advised the cruise ships of the implementation of the new transport infrastructure tax. The large ship infrastructure tax has been repealed. The bulk of these increased taxes will be allocated to the refitting of government marine vessels and the purchase of public transportation infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the critical importance of air service for Bermuda's economic and social well-being, the Ministry of Tourism and Transport continues to collaborate with the Bermuda Tourism Authority, the BAA, Bermuda Skyport Corporation Limited, and other key stakeholders to develop and implement a comprehensive air service development strategy for the island. The goal of this strategy is to attract, expand, and maintain a sustainable air service that meets Bermuda's diverse and evolving needs. This government has set aside $1.2 million in the upcoming financial year to support credible, commercially viable air service opportunities that align with our strategic priorities. Additionally, this government remains committed to ensuring all community partners play their part to support air service development for the island. The Ministry of National Security has been provided with a budget of $134.8 million, the same as last year. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of National Security has embarked on a reallocation initiative within the ministry to better align funding with strategic and operational priorities. This has been achieved by reallocating funds from the Bermuda Police Service while still fully maintaining frontline police levels and capabilities at current levels. In particular, the department will benefit from more than $1 million in savings as a result of lower orders. The ministry has prioritized an increase for the Royal Bermuda Regiment to launch the Bermuda Coast Guard. Additionally, funding for maintenance has increased at the Department of Corrections. Mr. Speaker, the ministry will continue work in the area of gang violence reduction initiatives, which includes the continuation of the Redemption Farm program, the work placement program, youth prevention programs in selected schools, the expected launch of an anti-bullying app, and the restorative circle interventions. All these initiatives are focused on the target audience of at-risk youth and aim to increase executive functioning skills. Additionally, the Department of Customs will start development of an export control regime for Bermuda. Capital funding for the ministry has been appropriated for continuing projects in fiscal 2020-21, which includes the completion of the cross-departmental public safety radio system and CCTV upgrades for both the Bermuda Police Service and the Department of Corrections. The ministry will complete the implementation of the border management system for the Department of Immigration, which is critical for the opening of the redevelopment of the Al Wade International Airport. This is a critical dependency for the implementation of e-gates at the new airport. New capital project initiatives for the Ministry of National Security for fiscal 2020-2021 include the purchase of a new fire truck and a new ambulance for the Bermuda Fire and Rescue Service, in addition to upgrades and remediation for airport fire service buildings. Ministry of Legal Affairs. The Ministry of Legal Affairs will receive $50.1 million in the upcoming year. This represents an increase of $1,063,000, or 2% from the current 2019-20 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the safeguarding of children is paramount. As the representatives of our future generations, our children are valuable members of our society and deserve to be protected and kept safe. Therefore, $750,000 of the increase in funds will be allocated to programs within Department of Child and Family Services. A portion will be allocated to the psychoeducational program, which has been underfunded for several years. The program provides children and youth with protection, care, and nurturance by licensed overseas therapeutic facilities. It was developed to focus on children who could not be effectively treated in Bermuda, or those who had exhausted all available local therapeutic treatment services. Mr. Speaker, in the 2020-21 year, a transitional living regime for children who are too old for the care of Child and Family Services will be established. At the age of 18, children in care, most of whom have spent the majority of their childhood receiving services from the department, shift from being dependents on support from the department to depending on themselves. Many are not ready for the transition to adulthood. A transitional living facility will offer both a residential program and a community-based program, which will be aligned. The residential program will ensure housing stability, while the community-based program will provide case management support, guidance, and connection to educational, vocational, mental health services, and life skill coaching. It is essential to ensure that the needs of these children are addressed to improve the quality of their lives and afford them the opportunity to be successful contributing members of our community. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Health and Home Affairs has been provided with a budget allocation of approximately $18 million. In the upcoming fiscal year, a consumer protection bill will be tabled to address transparency and equitable treatment of consumers who use banking and mortgage services. The Consumer Affairs section will also be introducing amendments to the Landlord and Tenant Act of 1974 and the Rent Increase Domestic Premises Control Act of 1978 to harmonize the two acts to reflect today's rental market and to provide tenancy rights to boarding house residents. The ministry's priority is to ensure that the legislative framework reflects the requirements of both the tenant and landlord to create a fair and reasonable partnership through the creation of one comprehensive act. Mr. Speaker, to move towards solar energy and provide opportunity for Bermudians, the Department of Energy will be establishing a training program for solar installers. The Department of Planning is also working on initiatives for streamlining the planning application process. The department will also formulate procedures for emergency applications and other minor or fast-track developments, such as seasonal structures. A new initiative that is being explored by the department is the creation of a competent persons register, where minor works can be undertaken without the normal required inspections, provided the industry tradespersons meet a set of criteria to be defined and is therefore licensed. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there will soon be a legislative amendment to the Regulatory Act of 2011 to introduce a regulatory sandbox for testing of renewable energy that is not yet commercially available. This initiative is being progressed by a team including the Regulatory Authority and the Departments of Planning, Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, at the dawn of this new decade, the promise of the 21st century remains unfulfilled for too many Bermudians. A generation now knows austerity as the new normal. The governments they have known in their lives thus far have used numerous terms to explain or justify the inability of Bermuda to shed the constraints imposed by a global economic downturn that started in 2008. There's a palpable frustration across demographics to see Bermuda as a whole, small business, hardworking families, and eager young people are questioning the fundamentals of our economy and whether there is hope. Mr. Speaker, the responsibility of governments is to channel the mood and needs of the people into action. This country needs economic activity. Our economy needs diversification and growth. Our people need work, success, and hope. This fiscal year must be one of action. This government has taken the steps necessary to stimulate the activity needed in this economy. We've added more to the existing regimes that work to support economic growth and diversification. And most importantly, we have strengthened the social safety net that is demanded by modern societies. The challenge that is before us amounts to a call to action for all sectors of our society. The public service must hone its skills and deliver on the ambitious program set by the country's duly elected government. We, as elected Officials on both sides must put away our petty politics and recognize that the sacred trust of the electorate means more now than ever. Businesses must treat employees fairly, paying wage deductions in support of payroll tax, social insurance, pension contributions, and health insurance premiums as required by the law of the land. Those who have more must reach back and bring along those who have less. Young people must commit to excellence and to sharing that excellence to build the country they want to see. Mr. Speaker, this call to action brings to mind the words of an African proverb. If you wish to move a mountain tomorrow, you must start lifting stones today. Our commitment to leadership is to do just that. We will lift up people, we will empower people to lift up themselves and others, and we will build that fairer and better Bermuda on which our people are counting. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased and humbled, therefore, to present for the consideration of this honorable House the estimates of revenue and expenditure for fiscal 2020-21.
Bring it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.